There is an article in today's The Hindu in the text and the context section, the EU's Artificial Intelligence Act. European Union Parliament has reached to a consensus to come up with a draft of ambitious Artificial Intelligence Act. But this is at the draft stage, and it is expected that before the law will be finalized and passed, some changes may happen. But nonetheless, we will look at some of the provisions of the draft Artificial Intelligence Act, but not thoroughly because it's not in the final form. Rather, what we will do here is have a discussion on as to why we are required to regulate artificial intelligence and what is the manner and the way in which such regulation must come about. And in the process, we will look at some of the provisions of the draft European Union's Artificial Intelligence Act. So first question first, why at all artificial intelligence regulation is required? The most fundamental aspect of artificial intelligence regulation is accountability. The thing is that the artificial intelligence systems can make decisions that affects human lives. And thus there is a need for ensuring that such systems are designated and deployed ethically, responsibly, with accountability. With power comes responsibility, and with great power comes great responsibility. The power in the hands of AI is great. You must already have started to feel it. And when such power exerts influence in human lives, it must be made accountable, just like the decisions of government are made accountable. That's the most fundamental reason why artificial intelligence must be regulated. And the use of AI in even more sensitive areas like healthcare, criminal justice, national security, it requires that the regulation is more proper and diligent so as to ensure that the systems are transparent, fair, and unbiased. Presently, European Union is leading in digital regulation, digital governance, and now in AI as well. The General Data Protection Regulation, it requires organization to provide individuals with right to explanation of automated decision making. This regulation ensures that individuals can understand the rationale behind automated decisions that affect them. And hence, it is important to regulate the AI systems. It is important to ensure appropriate regulations. Regulations must clarify liability and accountability for the decisions and the actions that the AI technologies take. Regulation is important, and the regulation to ensure accountability is even more important in case of AI system because it is unclear who should be held responsible: the designer, the developer, user, or the owner of the AI system. You already must be reading news about the liability cases against ChatGPT 4 because users are creating certain kind of content. Now, who is responsible for that? The user or the developer or the owner or the designer? Who? So regulation should clarify liability. That will strengthen accountability. And you understand the fundamental principle of governance that accountability requires transparency. Without transparency, you cannot have accountability. Without information sharing, you cannot have accountability. But the thing is, most of the artificial intelligence techniques, they are based on complex algorithms. They are seen as a black box by governance or regulatory machinery. And the entire process and system, they are hard to explain. This is why regulations should require transparency, auditability, explainability of the AI system, especially for public agencies. And without transparency, people would not understand what's going on. People have the right to understand how AI affects them. But at the same time, it is important to encourage innovation. So the regulators, they cannot ask for the source code. You understand, source code is the brain of the entire system. It tells you exactly what the system does. If that is asked for, then the competitors can get hold of it. And definitely that will discourage innovation and development. But what can be done, certain parameters can be given from the side of regulator, which all AI developers have to conform to. For example, the European Union's Draft Artificial Intelligence Act, they lay certain categories of AI, and one of the category is high risk category. Actually, they have come up with 4 categories presently, and in the high risk category, there are certain systems like biometric identification, categorization of natural persons. They include biometric identification, categorization of natural persons, The AI used in healthcare, education, employment and recruitment, law enforcement, justice delivery, essential public and private services, and so on. The Artificial Intelligence Act envisages establishing an European Union wide database of high risk AI systems. The Artificial Intelligence Act plans to set parameters so that the future technologies and even those presently undergoing development, they will be subject to strict risk criteria. And before any technology to be working in high risk category, before they make it to the market, they will be subjected to strict reviews. And the regulators will do conformity assessment. They will do algorithm impact assessment. They will analyze the data sets, different data sets. They will feed it to the AI tools to check for biasness, prejudice. They will also check the overall design. They will monitor the output of the system. But for that, the system has to be transparent, it has to be explainable. So either the technology itself must give some of the basic algorithms, or anyways they will have to conform to some of the basic parameters laid down by the European Union regulators. And only with such transparency, accountability will be made possible. AI systems can pose significant risk to public safety and security if not designed and developed carefully. For instance, self-driving cars that are not adequately regulated, it can lead to accidents, injuries, even deaths. Similarly, AI system used in critical infrastructure such as power grids, nuclear plants, they can significantly risk the entire system if they are not secure. In 2017, hackers used an AI-powered malware called WannaCry. UPSC even asked this in the prelims of 2017. Hackers used this malware to launch a global ransomware attack that affected over 2 lakh computers in 150 countries. It also targeted critical infrastructure globally. You know that AI systems rely heavily on data, and thus there is a need to ensure that data protection and privacy are robust enough to protect individuals' right. Because right to privacy globally is recognized as fundamental right. AI system can collect and process vast amount of personal data. They can be used in nefarious purpose such as surveillance, profiling, discrimination. You must be aware of Cambridge Analytica scandal that happened in 2018. It demonstrated how AI powered system can be used to influence elections by manipulating the individual's personal data. Whenever a technology develops, it brings both boon and bane, but there are some unintended harm as well. And many of that aspect of AI we already know. AI technologies like facial recognition, predictive policing, it has been globally observed that they have bias, unfairness, they have lack of transparency, and all these negatively impact people. So, regulations are needed to ensure AI does not violate human rights or cause discrimination. Stephen Hawking, he famously said, the development of full artificial intelligence could spell the end of human race. So we have to be cautious that artificial intelligence does not subsume the entire walk of life. There has to be some sensitive critical areas in which the application of artificial intelligence must be restricted. So, in the European Union's Artificial Intelligence Act, artificial intelligence related technologies, it has been prohibited. It has been made completely unacceptable in certain risk categories, and that include use of real-time facial and biometric identification systems in public spaces. It also includes systems of social scoring of citizens by government leading to unjustified and disproportionate detrimental treatment. It also includes systems of social scoring of citizens by governments. So AI cannot be used for any kind of social profiling. So if you exclude certain areas from the use of technology, then you definitely preempt some of the unintended harm. AI can be used to generate synthetic media. It can be used to manipulate public opinions. It can automate hacking. We already have seen the Cambridge Analytica scandal. You already know that WannaCry malware, it was also using AI. Machine learning systems can reflect and amplify the biases of human programmers and the limitations that human beings have that must definitely not translate, because when that get translated into technology, it also gets amplified. Regulations must ensure standards of inclusive design. We must not be seeing problems like gender biases by using AI as a tool for recruitment. You already know that deepfakes can manipulate videos. It can easily spread misinformation. So such deceptive, manipulative, malicious use of AI, it needs to be controlled. It's a very, very hot topic, and you must be reading about it every day. Google stopped bringing its AI based chat box into the market. The reason given was it developed certain skills that was unexpected. As AI continues to become more autonomous, it may reach and exceed human level intelligence, and hence it can escape out of our control. We need regulation to ensure human oversight and review of AI systems. The autonomous weapon systems that we are building, it should be regulated to have meaningful human control. Without regulation, there's a risk of AI becoming completely autonomous. And that will be very, very scary thing for us. But AI system also has potential to significantly impact the economy and society positively. It can significantly disrupt the labor market positively. It can have huge impact in economy. AI can create jobs, it can improve productivity, it can enhance quality of life, but it can also lead to job losses in certain sectors. It can reinforce the existing biases and discrimination. Overall, whether AI is going to be a force of good or not, it will be known only with the progression of time. But one thing is for sure that AI is going to bring our socio-economic systems into transition. And regulations around workforce training, welfare support, etc., is needed to smoothen this transition. Regulations and policy support concerning AI is also required to encourage job creation in certain areas, just like we did with digital technology. Government found new use cases in rural region, in remote region using digital technology. The same with even more vigor has to be done with artificial intelligence as well. And if we do that on time, there is a chance that we can achieve excellence in artificial intelligence, as we have achieved in IT, as we have achieved in space science, as we have achieved in automobiles, as we have done for vaccination. But for that, we have to be on time and we have to work harder, and it also requires regulation to keep us on track. European Union has become industry leader in global data protection regime because they already had general data protection regulation, and indications are that they are also going to strengthen the global hub of excellence in AI because they already have drafted Artificial Intelligence Act. Presently in US, they do not have strong regulation, forget about legislation. Overall, artificial intelligence and its automation, disruptive nature, it requires careful management and regulation to maximize the benefit and minimize the risk to individuals and society. It's a strategic issue. As per the European Commission's president, whose name I cannot pronounce, he said artificial intelligence is a strategic issue. A strategic issue that will determine the future of our economy and society. And when it's a strategic issue of such importance, it should not go unregulated. So, why regulate artificial intelligence? For so many reasons. That brings us to the second question: how regulate artificial intelligence? First of all, there should be a sense of responsible development of the technology. It must be developed responsibly, including diverse perspectives. It should have a very robust auditing mechanism to remove the systemic biasness. There must be some compliance parameters given, and rigorous testing should be done to ensure compliance with such parameters before the technology is brought in the market. In the draft legislation of European Union, they have given this sense of responsibility by categorizing different areas into four categories, and they have a high risk application category. The regulation compliance for this category is very robust. Although US has not done it, but China has come up with very tight regulation for artificial intelligence. At least theoretically, in the regulation, they have said that any technology related to or using artificial intelligence must value social good. So, a vision, a policy statement must be very clear as to what should be the trajectory of development of AI systems. And to give concrete form to such vision and ideas, you must have law in the country. Comprehensive laws like GDPR regarding data regulation of EU, they successfully balance innovation and risk management. It is very important that regulations should be proportionate and it should be weighted. It's very important that regulations must be proportionate. It must not hinder innovation. It must not choke the economic development. Some industry standards, maybe from IEEE. IEEE is an international body that gives standards in the fields of electronics and communications. So, such kind of international standards must be set for technologies or algorithms or any software or application based on AI. There must be partnerships between policymakers, researchers, and companies. It is important for AI models to be transparent and explain to users and stakeholders exactly how it collects data and how it uses it. This means providing clear documentation and explanation of how model works. They must make it easy to interpret the output of the model. When there is such transparency, it not only enables accountability, it also generates trust. It preempts the negative impact of the technology. And only when there are clear documentation and some explanations as to how the system works, auditing of the model can be done successfully. Auditing are very important. It ensures external control with the compliance parameters. It preempts the potential bias, negative impact of the technology. But for auditing to be objective, as we already discussed, some of the standards, maybe from IEEE or maybe some any other international body, should be given. There must also be establishment of certification and standards that the AI products and services meet certain minimum requirement for safety, privacy, ethical considerations. For example, European Union's proposed Artificial Intelligence Act, it aims to establish a legal framework for AI by introducing requirements for high-risk AI systems. We already have discussed, they have set out certain parameters that any AI based platform has to conform to before receiving certification, before they can be placed in the market. When you make a law, these things are made possible. In the law, you can also prohibit use of artificial intelligence in certain areas. As we already discussed, maybe you can go for prohibition of lethal autonomous weapon system because they can select and engage targets without human intervention. They already are very controversial and they have been the subject of global campaign to be banned. Lethal autonomous weapons without human intervention. They raise discussions of ethicality and disproportionate use of the force. So, by law, you can exclude certain sensitive areas from use of this technology. Law can also fix the issue of liability. Liability frameworks can help ensure that those responsible for developing and deploying generative AIs can be held accountable for any negative impacts that they may cause. Compensating those who are harmed by generative AIs can be made objective if you have such provisions in the law of the land. Establishing clear guidelines as to how data is collected, how it is stored and used, and ensuring that data is representative and unbiased. It can be done by putting certain criterias of maybe localization of data. So that also requires law and regulation of AI and data governance in general. But there still will be left certain areas that law cannot cover because the pace of development of technology is always so fast, it always remains ahead of regulations and law. So there must be some general guidelines concerning the ethicality of the use of the technology. There must be certain guidelines that caters to the natural laws like privacy and security, fairness and accountability. And it's not that you make law once and the job is done. You have to be very proactive in the realm of regulation, legislation, especially for a technology that is developing so fast. You already must have sensed that GPT-4, it can take away lots of white collar job. GPT 3.5 used to write scholarly articles. It can philosophize like Socrates. It can write like Shakespeare. So the first collateral loss are going to happen to people who are in the business of content generation. It can also do programming. So basic rudimentary programming job will also be taken away. But it also has been observed that it cannot do the job on factory floor. So much of the job of manufacturing and also much of the scientific research related job and also much of the scientific research related job, they would be secured. They will relatively remain untouched. Now, it is the job of the policy makers people in the government to analyze, to do impact assessment of this new upcoming rapidly expanding technology. So if it is the case, then it must be planned out that more job must be created in manufacturing or scientific related jobs, or jobs that cannot be taken away, which will remain largely untouched or relatively stable. That is one of the powerful way of regulating powerful technology like artificial intelligence. And addressing the negative impact of generative AIs requires interdisciplinary research that brings together experts in the field of computer science, experts from ethics, from law, from sociology. This can help identify and address potential negative impacts from a variety of perspectives and ensure that solutions are holistic and effective. See, to understand pros and cons of technology like AI is super difficult. European Union has been in the process of coming up with a draft legislation on artificial intelligence for 2 years now. And finally, in a hurry-burry, they have done a deal and finally given a draft form of the law. And that is also expected to change a lot before it can become a law. So it is extremely important that continuous education and awareness program it must be carried out. Public, companies, policymakers, they all need to know about the pros and cons of AIs. People through awareness campaign must be made aware of issues like job disruption, data privacy, online misinformation. So overall, responsible AI governance requires laws, it requires policies, it requires various regulatory and auditing tools. It also requires education. It requires a shared commitment across all nations for a kind of progress that uplifts humanity as a whole. There is a news article with the headline Tele Manas counsels Kashmir's distressed souls. The news is based on Helpline Center to persuade the youth to not give up their life. Let's take up a case study on the burning issue of suicide. Suicide represents the depth of despair and anguish felt by the victim who sees no way out other than ending their life to escape unbearable suffering. Every man has intrinsic worth, and all human beings share a fundamental connection in our ability to feel, hope, and dream. The death of anyone by suicide causes sorrow that ripples through society, touching every stranger. Each suicide signals the state's failure to secure the basic condition for human dignity and livelihood, whether for farmers penniless in the face of calamity, students unable to see a future, widows marginalized, or girls subject to violence without recourse. When life's burdens outweigh coping means, the light of hope is quenched within, calling for compassion that arrives too late. And the case study goes on, highlighting the problems that people suffer in certain conditions that push them towards suicide. But since I have framed the question in such a way that I have not asked you to analyze the case, and it's not a situational case where I'm asking you what are the options available in the given scenario. There are four straightforward questions, so information given in the case as such has less relevance. So I'm not reading the entire case, rather jumping to the questions. Do you think taking one's own life is morally justified? The second question is why there is high suicide rates among youth, and why do even developed states in India have high suicide rate? And the prescriptive question, what steps can be taken to stop the youth from taking such extreme steps? We will begin with the first question, do you think taking one's own life is morally justified? To answer this question, I'll give you relevant moral theory. There is no right or wrong answer. After looking at the relevant moral theories, you see whether it is morally justified or not. People use utilitarianism for both justifying the morality and immorality of suicide. Jeremy Bentham, in his work Hedonistic Calculus, he personally concluded that although suicide offers utility by ending personal suffering, the grief it causes others may outweigh its utility. Both Jeremy Bentham and John Stuart Mill, they did not support suicide, but the philosophy of utilitarianism itself can be used to morally justify suicide depending upon what is the scope that you're looking at and how much suffering is the individual going through. Ultimately, it's the calculus. You have to weigh whether personal suffering is more or the grief that it causes to others, that is more? Which one outweighs the other? But Kant has categorically prohibited suicide. In accordance with the second formulation of his categorical imperative, Immanuel Kant argues that he who contemplates suicide should ask himself whether his action can be consistent with the idea of humanity as an end in itself. Immanuel Kant gave utmost importance to human life, and in his scheme of things, taking away human life by oneself or by others is categorically prohibited. If we look from the perspective of social contract theory, Rousseau improved on the social contract theory of Thomas Hobbes. And in that improved version, Rousseau seems to justify suicide. He says that every man has a right to risk his own life in order to preserve it. The statement is suggestive of what we are going to see in a while in support of suicide. If you are not able to live a moral life, you can risk it. But Thomas Hobbes, who originally gave the idea of social contract, in his famous book, The Leviathan, there he says that natural law forbids every man to do what is destructive of his life or take away the means of preserving the same. He states that breaking this natural law is irrational and immoral. So, according to the social contract theory of Thomas Hobbes, suicide is immoral. Aristotle, in his work Discussion of Courage, he explicitly maintains that committing suicide to avoid pain or other undesirable circumstances is a cowardly act. Aristotle concludes that self-killing does not treat oneself unjustly if you are looking at it from the standpoint of justice. But however, the conclusion is that suicide is somehow a wrong to the state or the community. And on that account, suicide is immoral. The same stand was taken by Plato. But to contemporary readers, the most striking feature of Plato's and Aristotle's text on suicide is the relative absence of concern for individual well-being or right. Both these great philosophers, Plato and Aristotle, they limit the justification for suicide largely to consideration about individuals' social roles or the social obligation. But there are many philosophers who have given prominence to individual rights and liberty. And moral justification to suicide can come from the realist philosophers, from Stoicists, from philosophers like great David Hume, who have written extensively on human nature. One of the founder of idealism, Herodotus, he says, when life is so burdensome, death has become for man a sought after refuge, justifying suicide. One of the most famous Stoicists, Marcus Aurelius, he says that death by one's own hand is always an option and frequently more honorable than a life of protracted misery. Stoicism, by and large, accepted that suicide was permissible for the wise person in circumstances that might prevent him from living a virtuous life. Even Confucianism holds that failure to follow certain values is worse than death, and hence suicide can be morally permissible and even praiseworthy if it is done for the sake of those values. David Hume is considered to be one of the greatest philosophers who extensively wrote on human nature. In one of his essays of suicide, he claims that suicide can be compared to retiring from society and becoming a total recluse, and such action is not considered immoral. Leonard Peikoff, he has written a book called Objectivism, the Philosophy of Ayn Rand. Ayn Rand, another great philosopher. It's written in that book, suicide is justified when man's life, owing to circumstances outside of a person's control, is no longer possible. He writes as an example, person with painful terminal illness or a prisoner in a concentration camp. For them, there is no chance of escape. He emphatically explains it that in such circumstances, suicide may not be rejection of life or rejection of reality. On the contrary, it may very well be the tragic reaffirmation. You embrace the reality and you understand that it's no longer possible to live with values, to live a virtuous life. You understand the situation that it has become so burdensome and you want to retire from it. And hence, Leonard Peikoff gives the opinion that a man about to suicide may be of the opinion that man's life means so much to me that I will not settle for anything less. I will not accept a living death as a substitute. You live a life as is commanded by morality, or you end it. That's the justification. Even bioethicists like Jacob Appel, he has criticized the arbitrary ethical system that allows patients to refuse care when they are physically ill, while denying mentally ill the right to suicide. Now, I leave you here. You make up your own mind. I've given you enough content to read, reflect, and form an opinion. You cannot be writing the entire stuff in the exam, but including 4 to 5 philosophy will suffice, and then you will give your conclusion. The second question was why there is high suicide rates among youths. We'll answer it from the four perspective. From sociological perspective, youth face intense pressure to succeed, and there is social stigma around failure. This sociological reason enhances the psychological reason. From various theories of stages of psychological development, it is clear that youth harbor anxiety over unknown future prospects, whether in education or job or life partner or otherwise. And many a times they are unable to see hope or alternatives. And this thing has been beautifully pointed out in a beautiful poem, Anthropocene Blues. According to Erickson's stages of psychological development, youth are in a stage of identity development and shaping life goals. But failure to navigate this stage successfully due to lack of support or otherwise can lead to role confusion, low self esteem, encouraging suicidal ideas. Quite the same idea has been given by Viktor Frankl. He said that having meaning or purpose in life is the basic psychological need. And youth in despair, youth who are having the trouble with succeeding, who are having role confusion or low self esteem, they often lack the purpose, the answer to this question why to continue living. The same idea also has been given by the great philosopher Nietzsche. The question is specific on youth, and this psychological theories explains high societal rates specific to youth. So it kind of begins from the sociological reasons, which intensifies the psychological reasons, which further gets intensified for other sociological reasons. Youth need empathy. They need a patient ear in the face of their life difficulties. As Bhagavad Gita has counseled us, having a shoulder to cry on is humanity's greatest blessing. But this support is often lacking for youth in distress. Then you have other sociological reasons. Traditional community and family structures, they are eroding because of urbanization, globalization, erosion of values, leaving youth with fewer anchors to come when there is turmoil in their life. Then you can come to public administration reason or governance related reasons. India's mental health care system requires reform to serve vulnerable youth, providing accessible support. According to WHO, there is no health without mental health. Yet, this duty to citizens in despair remains unfulfilled. These are some of the reasons that you can put forward for high suicide rates among youth. The third question is why do developed states in India also have high suicide rate? There could be various reasons to talk about it. Let's begin from greater social comparison and competition in developed states or developed areas. In affluent societies, people constantly compare themselves with others and compete to achieve material symbols of success like expensive goods, bigger house. All these fuel anxiety, inadequacy, and distress when unable to attain these social standards. Prosperous societies, they tend to value individualism over community bonds. But weak social connections leave people without adequate support in times of difficulties or crisis, and hence they are unable to cope due to stigma around seeking help. You can think of a third reason called as hedonistic treadmill. People quickly adapt to improved life circumstances in affluent societies and constantly seek more material gains to drive happiness. But this hedonistic treadmill leaves them stuck and unable to find meaning or purpose beyond consumption and acquisition. And hence it is said, providing avenues to discover purpose and passion is key. It is key to a happy life. It is key to avoid anxiety. There are many theorists who argue that basic survival needs being met, wealthier individuals, more educated people, they grapple more with the existential challenges around life's meaning and purpose. So they have this existential angst, and when they are unable to find answers, this philosophical angst leads to despair and suicidal ideation and suicidal ideas. This is well documented. This is well documented and corroborated by data. There is very high rate of suicide among those with college education. The neoliberal ideology to develop societies promote free market. It promotes self-interest and ruthless competition. And in the urban areas, in developed states, neoliberal ethics are more prominent. But this also breeds inequality, selfishness, lack of empathy. There are compassion fatigue in the society. There's wariness towards suffering of others. In the developed states, in the urban areas, there is breakdown of traditional structures. Modernization in prosperous societies often disintegrates traditional society and family structures, which used to provide stability, purpose, care in the time of difficulties. But material abundance alone does not replace the psychological, emotional, and existential need which used to be once met through cultural institutions and relationships. And of course, there are mental health care gaps. While affluent states may provide advanced health care, stigma around mental illness and lack of accessible psychological support structures lead to many silently suffering without relief of hope until a breakpoint comes.